God, Jim, with the slowing of the housing market, I mean, are we going to see the emergence of more accidental landlords?
Well, as I was going to say,
I know, I got you.
it's well, a landlord actually remarked to me the other day that he felt that there was even more posher upmarket properties actually coming to market to rent in the last 6 months compared to a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. Does that ring true to you?
It does, and it's something that I've seen more and more over the last few months, and things that a lot more higher value properties and a lot more upmarket areas are coming to the market for rent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I stated well that this was the case, and it wasn't allowed, down. It wasn't all down to recent rental growth or anything like that. It was all growth in that market, accidental landlords, and we talked about this. I mean, what's the implications for the Fife housing market then, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, the Fife housing market is showing signs of a slight slowdown, and predictions for the further house prices to decline slightly. We're starting to see the return of accidental landlords, but in a somewhat different form from what they were in previous years. If you think back to like 2009 and things. So, I mean, I think it's important that we talk about what is an accidental landlord, I think, firstly, because people will be wondering what he's talking about an accidental landlord.
Because most people won't know actually what an accidental landlord is. I mean, I tried to explain it to the people on Instagram, TikTok when we're running the credits, the intro at the beginning. But just for the benefit of everybody else again, can you go over this?
Yeah. Now, an accidental landlord becomes a landlord maybe unexpectedly or unintentionally, and this often occurs when homeowners rent out their property instead of maybe selling it in a currently slowing market, maybe if that's the situation, if it's a change in their personal circumstances, or like if they need to move for work and things, that's quite common, or even unforeseen circumstances where they inherit a property and things as well. I see that happening, and that's what you would class as someone who's an accidental landlord.
Yeah, and now we've seen accidental landlords because you've actually picked up quite a lot of properties, high value ones, as we'd said before, and it's people actually moving from serviced accommodation into the mainstream residential rent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen a lot of people, obviously, for work commitments and things as well. There's a multitude of things, but I've seen it being a lot more common now. And so there also is people who maybe are on the fence about selling and things, but it's not maybe the right time. Maybe the market conditions for them doesn't suit their individual circumstances just now, so it makes sense for them to rent at the moment.
Okay, so I'm just trying to think where we'll go with this then. To give us an idea about what is the growth of rents? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, while the sales market in Fife has experienced a period of strength in recent years, activity has started to slow down from like the levels of like 2021 and 2022, and there has been a soaring demand for Fife rental properties over that time.
I wouldn't say it was just Fife; it's right across the UK, isn't it?
I mean, I reference Fife because obviously that's where we are.
Scotland, there's a two-tier system emerging. There's a system where it's market rents for all the existing properties that are actually going up for let. But the current properties that are actually tenanted, they're being actually restricted. This is almost like, you ever remember that story about the wee boy in the dam in Holland? It tried to plug the hole with his finger. This is like Patrick Harvey trying to plug the hole of the private rented sector. And it's like, at some point in time, this dam is going to burst and it's going to cause huge problems.
Yeah.
And I think kicking the can down the road is not the solution.
Definitely not. No, definitely not. And as you said, I mean, I'll give you an idea how the growth of rents in the Fife area at the moment anyway. I mean, the average rent for homes coming to the market in Fife in the 2021 period was around £764 a month, whilst this year, in 2023, it's been around £834 a month. So that's quite a significant jump.
Yeah, it is. However, when you see salaries are actually on average going up 7.8% in a year, and with NHS bonuses on them, 8.2% that goes up to, then it's almost in line. But there's an underlying thing. It's not highlighted here. And it's the fact that all the existing rents that are in right now from the very beginning have never kept up with inflation from when they all first started. And they're the ones getting restricted right now, when in actual fact, it possibly should be the current market rents that are getting restricted and not the existing ones. But I actually think there's a way. I actually think they've got it wrong in terms of that. But it's interesting that you actually say that, because effectively, what is that? 30, 36, 60, £70 extra a month?
Yeah.
So £70 extra a month, it's not a huge amount in terms of the average salary. £70, 77, 80, 840 a year. It's a bit when you say that like that. However, because house prices have gone up and bank base rates have gone up in order to finance these properties, that's what makes it extremely difficult, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's people will automatically look at that difference in rental price from 2021 to now and think, well, that's such a big jump, which I said it is a significant jump, but there's a lot of other factors that you need to consider, and salaries and things as well is one of them, like you said, Jim. And really, when you break it down like that, it isn't as bad as it looks in terms of comparison between the jump in rents from 1 year to the next, or to 2 years down the line.
Take us back to 2008, 2009 then, just to see where it was in terms of that.
Yeah, I mean, back in 2008, 2009, this trend was particularly evident in the middle market segment. Yeah. So, however, in 2023, many property commentators were suggesting if accidental landlords do start to emerge, it will be in the upper quartile property segment, which is like the top 25% of property values, where many homeowners bought in the post-lockdown race and the race for space, basically.
Yeah, this will be interesting actually when you talk about this, because you're going to go into this in a wee bit more detail in terms of numbers and pounds, shillings, and pence.
Yeah.
I'm interested in this, because the upper quartile is the higher value in order to purchase. Therefore, you have to get a return on that money. If somebody's purchasing it at that price and putting all that money into a property, there has to be a decent return in comparison to where you can invest it somewhere else, or you'll not attract somebody into that buy-to-let market. Therefore, that tenancy won't exist. Therefore, somebody won't be able to get a home. And at this point in time, because properties are so restricted in terms of supply for the private rented sector, that is essential at this point in time. So possibly, by what you've said here, we might have to ride out a storm, if that means sense. And that tends to be for tenants and for landlords, because both sides, landlords have increasing costs and tenants have increasing costs as well. But the thing about it is it's a trade-off between you buy or you rent. Now, this is quite interesting. This is what I saw. This is what I heard, and I remember, and I thought, this is a really good one. A mortgage payment is the minimum amount you'll ever pay, because you're going to have to pay for repairs and improvements and everything else that comes after it for buying a property. A rental payment is the maximum amount you'll have to pay for a property, because the landlord has to take responsibility for the repairs and improvements and everything else that happens to it. Yeah. So it's quite interesting where the rental payment is the maximum that you'll pay for having a property every month. The mortgage payment is the minimum amount you'll be paying for a property every single month. And it's a trade-off, whether it's a short-term or whether it's a long-term thing that you're actually wanting to live in the property, or whether it's just a stepping stone to the next property, or maybe just a temporary contract where possibly renting is the best solution to go. So take me a wee bit more and let's drive down to these figures.
Yeah, so the upper quartile, as we refer to it, is rental, where rental properties are at the higher value and things. The rents, they start in just over about the £600 per calendar month. And let's look at the Fife area. So we're talking about Fife, which is KY 1 to 12 and KY 14 and 16 and things. Okay.
This is quite interesting, because we say that the upper quartile rent starts at over £600 a month. And I just want to point out, it's starting and it's the 25% most expensive houses in Fife. Yeah. So just to give you a comparison, I'm sitting at 487 on average per month. So I'm in the, well, I wouldn't say I'm in the lower quartile, but I'm able to rent at these levels because of I'm a long-term landlord, you know, so it's affordability as well. But I'm still 23% below inflation.
Yeah.
Where inflation should put me. If I applied inflation from the very beginning, I had all these properties, I would have to be at 623 per month on average. But I'm at 487. And I started at 423 all these years ago. So it just shows you it's not moved up that much in comparison to inflation in terms of what I'm charging. And when you look at the upper quartile, I mean, that's quite surprising that just the starting price is just 600 for the 25% most expensive houses in Fife. Somebody must have no mortgage and possibly have no costs, or they're covering it all, and they're basically spinning wheels with a tenant and just renting it to them for £600 a month. Because, you know, I would doubt whether you could actually run the property on that in the 25% upper quartile.
At the moment, I would agree with you definitely. So, but let's look at the Fife area. So I've got this. I've got the chart here. Could you see that? Okay.
Yep. Perfect.
Let me talk you through this then. So, in the first 7 months of 2021, so that's January to July.
And so if you hover your mouse over your graphic, we should be able to see it coming on the screen.
Yeah, so 2021, the first of January to July. Okay, so we're talking about this period here. The first 7 months, an average of 105 properties a month came onto the market for rent at £600 per calendar month or more. Okay,
yeah, that's the yellow line. So that's the average 105 properties. Yeah, at 600 plus or more.
Yeah. And then in the first 7 months for 2022, which is for the January to the July again, so this section here, we had an average of 89 properties a month, which came to the market at £600 per calendar month and more. Okay. And then if we look at this year, so if we look at the first 7 months in this year, which is again obviously from the January to the July, which is just where we're about to here, there was an average of 119 properties come to the market for rent at £600 per calendar month or more.
Wow.
So you see that line.
That's quite surprising. But you see that blue line actually shows you actually what happens in between there. But the average is a straight yellow line going from start to stop. Because you notice in 2022, the average was actually a lot less than 2021 and 2023 as well. I wonder what happened in 2022. That's interesting. The average number of properties. Was that the boom? Was that the boom in 2022?
It was,
Kind of when the rental stock actually dropped quite significantly. And then I suppose when you look at that, the 89 per month, and then it's got 20 on
that
top
area
of that.
Here.
Yeah, you're about 30. You're about 30 extra a month in the upper quartile. I can see where that is from 2022 to 2023.
Yeah, and this area here is obviously the knock-on effect from the pandemic and things. But then obviously we come out the other side of that pretty well. So. Okay,
so where do we go on from here, mate?
Yeah, so I mean, you could look at that and say, well, many of these could, obviously these people with these properties can afford to be patient in pursuit of maybe optimum selling conditions, because people are obviously maybe thinking, right, okay, I'll hold out until things are maybe better, and people are privileged to be in that position where they can wait until market conditions suit their individual obviously needs to achieve whatever they want for their property. And the rise of accidental landlords then comes as a byproduct of that. And that could be attributed to, like I say, various factors such as limited property appreciation and increased mortgage costs, which we're experiencing just now, and robust demands
for rentals.
For rentals, yes. So making renting out properties a really attractive alternative to accepting something, an offer on a property that you're not really actually looking for. And that's where the accidental landlord comes from, and are coming from quite predominantly at the moment.
Yeah, do you think it's a case that they think, you know, the accidental landlords think in the next couple of years the price point might be more attractive?
I do have people in that mindset, yeah.
And they're holding out for a couple of years just to rent it until that time comes.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see though. I mean, because when you look at the current legislation and the fact that you can only evict somebody, so you can only get your house back if you're selling it, but you have to show financial hardship if you're selling it.
The only way you could legally serve a notice to sell the property in Scotland is if you are in a position where you could prove financial hardship, or indeed you or your immediate family need to move back into the property to actually live in it. So if you have another residence, if that's a second home,
yeah,
then no.
Or the tenants in 6 months or more arrears.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So yeah, and or antisocial behaviour, but that's accelerated proceedings, isn't it?
That's extenuating circumstances. You really need to be able to prove that.
Yeah, and that takes a huge amount of effort to prove, isn't it? And they're going to be a lot of things. So it's quite interesting that you say that. You know, so a lot of landlords should think carefully then about renting in what I would determine as a short term, which is the next couple of years, just in case that legislation stays in place, and they can't show financial hardship. And then selling is like, well, you're stuck with the tenant, whether you can't exit.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm on the fence with that idea. I'm kind of on the tenant side. I'm on the landlord side, and I'm not really sure what side I'm sitting on just now. I tend to kind of think if you're going to go into this market, it should be long term. You should be looking to being a long term landlord with a view to possibly pass on his generational wealth, with a view to possibly maybe plan to exit. You know, do a 5-year plan of exit rather than actually just say, oh, by the way, you know, in the next 6 months, the next year, I'm starting to sell. I kind of think that's what it is. Or possibly you sell to another landlord, but you know yourself, if you sell to another landlord, the other landlord really wants a knockdown discount.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to like the higher value property and people accidentally or unintentionally having to let the property, I've got one at the moment where they work overseas. They will eventually be coming here. They're from here originally, so they're coming back to live in the property, but that will be their main residence, and they have another property which they will sell once they move. And they're looking to let for maybe about a year and a half. So I think it's maybe okay, that's an option, but we can't enforce an actual like year term on a lease or anything. So it's about us maybe being really transparent with the tenant at the beginning and saying this is the state of play, and finding the right person who's maybe coming to work here for a year. And
it's about being transparent with the landlord as well, isn't it? Yes, though, and making sure the landlord understands that potentially in a couple of years, if they did come back, they might not actually be able to get the property back until a certain amount of time.
It might not just be a straightforward process. There might be a few things that we need to obviously go through to.
So are other accidental landlords created through other diverse circumstances? And if so, what are these other diverse circumstances?
Yeah, I think irrespective of what goes on in the economy and the Fife property market, I mean, births, deaths, marriages, everything continues, and this will always be there will always be some new couples who decide to rent out and use properties as their initial residence, or their properties are moving into shared homes, while others maybe inherit properties through the passing of parents and grandparents. So that's quite a common thing as well. So yeah. These are all of the circumstances that
I see that. I actually see that quite a lot. Well, not quite a lot, but more than what I usually do. And the fact that, you know, maybe there's 4 involved in, for example, a deceased estate, and 3 potentially want to sell, and 1 wants to rent, or vice versa, or you know, there's a sort of mix, and it's like, well, 1 then goes, well, or the 2 go, I tell you what, we'll try and buy the other 2 out. So there's a wee bit of delay whether it's going to come to market as a sale or whether it's actually going to be rented out. But often, more than anything, it's very rare that it actually gets rented out, because the reality is when you walk into this property, because this is a leased estate, you usually find it's actually there's not been much done to over the years, and the existing person that was in it before, you know, put up with the kitchen for 30 years and put up with the bathroom, and it's now still pampas green and stuff like that. These properties tend to have a need for a light refurbishment or a full refurbishment, and plus the fact they need to make sure you've got your EICR, your electricity safety certificate. You need to make sure you've got a gas certificate. You need to make sure you've got Legionella certificate. You need to make sure your smoke detectors and your heat detector, your carbon monoxide detector. Is there anything else that I've missed? Fire and Furnishing Act.
Your energy performance certificate.
Energy performance certificate. What else?
And ultimately your landlord registration number as well.
Yeah. So well, on the face of it, everybody thinks, oh, it's money for old rope, but the reality is there's a lot of hurdles to jump it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, sometimes when I speak to landlords and go through, right, we need to do this, we need to do this. Do you need consent from your mortgage provider to let the property, or you actually have to have a buy-to-let mortgage in place? You need to have landlord's insurance. It's not just
landlord's insurance is really important.
Do you know? So, and when I go through every with them, I can see some people's eyes like that. But there is, to me, if you've got a good agent, and they're happy to help you through that process. There is a methodical process to go through and get everything put in place, but it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder where you got that expression. It's not for the faint-hearted. You're not kidding. Definitely, residential rent mainstream is not for the faint-hearted.
You need to have the right people on your side.
You have to be a giver, and you have to solve a lot of problems for people with no thought for yourself. It has to be the tenant that comes first every single time. Your boiler breaks down, you've not got enough money, you're not buying your new car, or you're not getting your new kitchen, or you're not getting your new bathroom, or you're not going on your holiday, because the boiler is more important to the tenant. And that's what you have to choose from. That's what it is to be a landlord, I would say. So for people that are actually considering being a landlord, it is definitely not money for old rope. It is work, effort, and it's sacrifice sometimes. We talk about that a lot in the Wealth Creation Show, don't we?
Yeah, we do. The thing about accidental landlords and landlords that maybe have made that choice to let a property because maybe, like I say, the current market conditions for selling the property is not in their favour, then, I mean, average tenancy lengths, I mean, the current tenancy length at the moment for Fife Landlords is about 51 months, so which is about 4 years. I think we worked out our average, so you're about 3 to 4 years. I think that probably sounds about right.
Tell you what, Richard, 5-6 years ago, the average was 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
So people are living a lot longer in private residential rented properties. You know, do you know anything behind that? Do you know why that is? Is that just because of the scarcity and the fact that, or a lot of people are actually quite happy because standards have improved in the private rented sector? Or is it a combination?
We have such a higher quality of property now that we rent compared to years back, and people are a lot more comfortable. You've got generation rent, you've got people that actually choose to rent, and if you're providing a good property where they are comfortable, and people will stay longer, and ultimately that's what's happening. 3 to 4 years is definitely an average rent that I see quite commonly.
Yeah, that is actually quite important. You're absolutely right. Is if you're providing a really good high standard property, I mean mid to high standard, you know, depending on what your market is. If you're going high standard, you're at £1,600 to £2,000 a month. If you're going mid market, you're probably around about maybe 600 to 1,200, something like that. If you're going the lower quartile, you know, which is about 600 and down, and that's fine. But that's not the standard of the property. That's just probably more than likely the price of the property you originally bought for, to give it perspective. Because you know yourself, I've just spent recently about £80,000 on refurbs for 1, 2, 3, 4. Well,
we're on our fifth, I think.
Are we? Okay, on our fifth. There you go.
Here we are, yeah.
But it just shows you, you know, the amount it actually has to go in. I mean, there's not very many people that could just go, I tell you what, we'll have to spend £80,000, and it just needs to be done. And that's what I think it is important to be a landlord, to know when you have to invest and when you have to keep doing that. For me personally, you know yourself, and for all landlords out there, it should know this. It's a consistent thing. It's not just, the tenant's phoned up now and we'll hold off and then we'll do it. It's like, no, we'll have to get it done now. And then also when the tenant eventually moves out, potentially, that's when you can refurb it. And sometimes when the tenant's in, you can refurb as well because they're happy to let that happen.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. But I think as well it's important, and like you said there, Jim, if you're stepping into the shoes of being an accidental landlord or, you know, an unintentional landlord, it does carry a lot of specific implications that homeowners need to be mindful of and maybe don't take into consideration, and things like understanding tax implications. And
now this is actually quite important. Look what I'm reading. Taxtopia.
There you go.
And I tell you what, it's the rebel accountant, and it's like, wow, this is how the wealthy and the rich actually use the tax system to their advantage. So it'll be interesting to actually read that. I've just started that. So it'll be interesting to find all about that. I'm an accountant by trade anyway, so it kind of floats my boat, and I like to know a bit more about how people do this in order to do that. But when it comes to, and that's probably the benefit our landlords get as well, and the fact that when they do need things like capital gains and how to do that, they can come to us and we can talk to them about it way in advance, so they don't actually technically need to go to Facebook and ask people's opinions.
Yeah, I know, which is crazy. But I mean,
listen, Richard, it often frightens me when you go on some of the landlord forums and people go on and explain, and just in one soundbite about, I've got one property, I'm going to sell it for this price. What should I do? And what will the capital gains be? And it's like, and how will I approach this? And it's like, you've not told me anything. You know, are you married? Because that makes a fundamental difference in your allowances, because you can offset on love, favour and affection under the rules. So you can transfer and offset your capital gains allowance there with your partner that you're married to. You know, have you got a transitional relief because what you've done? Have you done improvements that you've not actually taken as deductions over the years, which you can capitalise and actually add on to minimise your capital gains? These are all things that have to be thought out. And as I said, I'm amazed how many people actually go to social media and just ask other people. And the first thing I always say is, like, for God's sake, go and speak to an accountant, so they understand your whole financial situation, because it's not just about, should I sell now, or if it's should I sell now or should I wait, they need to know that. Somebody needs to know that in order to decide whether you should be selling now or not. Just know based on, oh, I'm going to get this amount of money and I bought it for that amount. It's like, that tells you nothing. So just be wary about the information and advice you get from social media when you go into landlord forums. You remember that, you know, even idiots have opinions.
I know. But I mean,
but it's true. You know, I've heard somebody else far more successful than me saying that. But you know, even idiots have opinions, and some people will go, "Hey, there's one here." Some people will be thinking that.
But then,
it's like fill your boots. If that's what you think, when you're watching this, switch off and do something else.
Tax is a tricky one, and if you really don't grasp it, or maybe you don't have a great understanding of it, which a lot of people don't, then make sure you have the right people that you're speaking to that could advise you properly. I mean, transitioning to like a landlord status may result in a loss of specific tax benefits, and I'd like you say, Jim, including stamp duty and.
I've read it this morning on lots of forums. I'm coming back from overseas. I'm about to buy a house in Scotland. Will I have to pay the ADS? The answer to that is yes, because you own another property in England. And everybody else there was other people saying there, no, you'll be able to get around it in some way. And then it says, but what if I do a limited company? Can I get around it like that? And other people were saying, yeah, you could probably get around it with a limited company in some jiggery pokery thing. And it's like, no, you cannot get away from it regardless of what you're doing, unless you physically buy it in a first-time buyer or somebody is using it as their private residential home name. But they have to use it as their private residential home, remember. It has to be for them. So you could stay with them. That's potential. That's probably the only way you maybe get around that. But it has to be their principal private residential property. You can't own a second property somewhere else and actually try to get away with it. So so speak to a solicitor, a really good solicitor will be able to tell you advice on that based on your personal circumstances, and speak to a really good accountant to talk you through that as well in terms of your financial situation. It's not deductible, by the way, ADS and stamp duty against your income when you're a landlord, because it's not deductible expenses. It's actually capitalised. In terms of your legal fees, they're capitalised as well. So you can't get any of that deductible against your current income if you are actually going to be a landlord and try to get away with it like that. So there's lots of different implications and tax implications to that. Okay, Richard, what other things do we need to think about?
No, that's fine. You covered quite a lot there, but also you've got income tax on the income you generate from that rent. Like you say, Jim, upon selling your property, you will need to think about the capital gains tax that on the profit you've made from that sale, as it's no longer considered your primary residence, like you say, because you've obviously rented the property, and you would really need to get advice from an accountant.
It's quite interesting because I have an accountant as well, which I regularly discuss issues with and matters with. Now, some of the refurbs I've been doing recently, especially after purchase, I've been like, well, technically, I think they should be capitalised under the rules. And he's saying, well, you know, it's up to you. You can. He says technically as well that you could possibly offset them against your current income. It depends how you want your balance sheet to look and your profits to look for that year, and if you want to minimise it or you want to pass it on, or you have an intention of selling. So if your intention is never to sell, then the last thing you want to do is capitalise it. Because if you capitalise it, you'll not get that offset and you'll never get it because you'll never sell. So you want to look at ways of being able to work that out with the proper advice and the proper professionals. Remember, and I'll just tell you this, I am not in this capacity for people, their accountant or financial advisor. You must seek professional advice from suitably qualified people.
Yeah. Yeah, although what you're telling us, Jim, is more than likely credible and correct, please don't take this as gospel and speak to everybody's situation is different. So I mean, things are based on an individual basis as well.
So the other thing is, a lot of Fife landlords, or even landlords right throughout the UK, in order to mitigate their tax, they've actually chosen to incorporate into limited companies. I mean, corporate structures offer potential relief on mortgage costs. You get full mortgage cost relief. You don't get the disallowed relief, which you get under your own personal name under Section 24. So the mortgage costs are fully deductible. The mortgage cost is the interest part, not the debt reduction payment. In other words, the capital payment towards reducing your loan. That is not deductible. This is why most landlords like myself actually just have interest-only mortgages. We have no intention of paying down our debt because the debt reduces in value as inflation goes up. So that amount actually gets destroyed with inflation, that initial amount that you borrowed. And plus the fact is that capital value of the property goes up at the same time. So you get two bites of the cherry here. And then as well, you're able to use it to leverage yourself and actually borrow more money, but not borrow more money to take out for you to spend, because that element isn't deductible under the legislation. That's key here. Or if you take it out in a limited company, then you're potentially taking out his income and you'll be subject to income tax in your own name.
Yeah.
So you have to watch out for that. Again, this is all about, you notice how I'm saying here, this is why you speak to an accountant, because everybody can advise you, but unless they know your full circumstances individually, we will never be able to advise you. That's the key here. So I'm trying to make this as complex as possible so you understand the minefield that you're going to enter right now if you choose to do this. So that's the key here. The corporate structures offer potential tax relief, as I said, on mortgage costs and the opportunity to pay lower corporation tax, because rather than individual corporation tax, because remember, you're also keeping it in the company, you could potentially take it out as dividends later on. And dividends are subject to no national insurance, but they're subject to a lower rate of 8.75%. At a higher rate, they're subject to about, I think it's 33.75%. So again, that's another way. But if you're up at 33, you could put a pension contribution in. And you put a pension contribution in, you could bring your level down to your lower rate again, so you could become a low rate taxpayer, but actually be able to put a pension contribution in. You get the higher rate back, but your basic rate would be added onto your pension contribution itself. See how that works?
Yeah.
Always tax efficient.
Also, when you're moving properties across into a limited company as well, you need to bear in mind that there will it will involve additional expenses like stamp duty and capital gains and things on the existing property transfer to the company.
Yeah, yeah, that is a big thing.
We've had people caught with that before as well, Jim. You know,
there is a bit of legislation in here, and I don't want to do it personally, but I'm still considering it, because as base rates going up, it's like it makes it more attractive to do it. But you can actually take your whole portfolio in your name and transfer it to a limited company, but it has to be transferred at the initial base cost. So in other words, you can transfer it at base cost with no charge to capital gains. But it means if you bought it for £15,000 and your limited company owns it, your limited company buys it at £15,000, there's no capital gains. But when you go to sell it, it's maybe worth 100,000 now. So it's your limited company that pays the capital gains and not you. But you have to get approval from the Inland Revenue for doing that. And you have to, again, speak to an accountant if that's possible for you individually. So there is a way to do it, but you have to do all or nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've not looked into it entirely, but I know on a summary basis that tends to be what it is right now. So it is one way of doing it, but you're actually passing all these gains. Whereas the other way, as you said, is what I've done before. Over the years, I've been transferring some of them in my own name and my wife's name to a limited company, but we've been selling them, therefore creating a capital gain. Therefore, but we're able to use our own capital allowances together. So it's a £25,000 deduction.
12.5 each,
yeah, in terms of the allowance. So then we pay the capital gains on the rest of it itself, minus things like, lawyers and fees and the staging fees. If that's what you're getting involved in, these are all deductible at the point of sale against the capital amount. So that's the sort of things you've got to consider if it's worth it. So we've been doing that. But we've also been doing it in chunks. So if we've been buying 4 properties, we've been transferring 2 of our own at the same transaction, making 6. So therefore, we don't pay ADS on that. So we don't pay the 6% additional dwelling supplement either. But if you buy a lot more, you'll be MDR. Most people don't know about this, multiple dwellings relief. And I tell you what, if it's classed as a residential transaction, you could be ending up paying £68,000 in tax. This was me. I saw your eyebrow go up there. Oh my God.
I know about this.
£60,000 in additional tax. Or if it's classified as a commercial transaction, you'd be paying £23,000 additional tax. So luckily, what I'm doing is classified as a commercial transaction under the deal, because it's so large, the transaction I'm doing, they classify it as commercial rather than actually residential. So MDR is another one to watch out for with bigger portfolio purchases. But technically, they're usually classified as commercial because they're big portfolio purchases. Another one as well, this is just another bit of advice for people. What you can do, if you're buying a portfolio and a bigger, we're getting into wealth creation, aren't we?
Well, that's good advice, though, I think.
If you're buying a portfolio and it's a big portfolio, but you're getting a huge discount, you might want to consider my mate Kevin Wright, who's the bridger. So he's a ninja. He's the Ninja Investors channel, Recycle Your Cash. So Kevin actually advises. I was reading his book and I was talking to him way back. And we conflab on social media now and again. He's the master of this, where you actually get it into a bridging company. The bridging company then buy it at the lower amount. Therefore, the 6 months passes. Then you can bring it back out and you can finance it to a mortgage, well, a bank, not a mortgage company. Very rare it will do it because they'll do a commercial transaction on the full portfolio, but they'll put it at full value now. So see how you can get that with no money down, potentially.
Yeah.
You've got to watch. You've got to make sure that works. Because you could end up doing it on a bridge and not be able to do it to the next stage. You could be stuck on a bridge and loan.
Just going to say you'll be stuck there, yeah.
Out of business. So it takes a bit of skill to do that and a system to do that in order to get through that. So these are all different things that you could actually do. But definitely incorporation is one a lot of people have actually gone down the route of, because you can store the money for later. And it's only taxable at corporation tax rates, and you don't get I'll not go into it. The self-assessment.
I think what you demonstrate, dear Jim, is that the tax implications are really important to consider.
You could actually do a SaaS and actually be able to lend to your own company and actually get your own pension contributions into your SaaS and actually get your corporation tax added back onto your SaaS payment as well. Again, something that I'm learning about right now. So these are all different things that you can do.
What I take for that as well is, and I think what other people should take, and you should really realise that there's no way around tax or avoiding tax, should I say, but there's smart ways to deal with it.
Well, there's ways of avoiding tax.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's illegal, remember. There's no way of evading tax.
Evading, there's the right word for it. You can't evade tax, but there's smart ways.
This is the first thing. This is the two distinctions we get taught when we were first trained as accountants.
Yeah.
First day I walked in, the two distinctions were there's tax avoidance and there's tax evasion. Tax avoidance, perfectly legal. You're using the system to your advantage. Although when you read that Taxtopia, it's like, wow, you're kidding. They did that. And we're talking about huge corporations that are doing that. Okay, and then there's tax evasion, which is definitely evading tax, and that's a criminal offence.
Yeah.
So there's good planning, which is technically tax avoidance. Although people don't want to talk about tax avoidance because it's frowned upon. It's like, hey, if somebody set the rules and it's like, why should you not be taking advantage of that? Why should you not be declaring that? Why should you not be applying that to what you're doing? That's simple fairness, because everybody else would do it in any other situation, even if it was nothing to do with what we're talking about just now.
Yeah, definitely.
So I definitely think that's the way to go. So tax is all about making it proper. So individual landlords with only one property may really find in a nutshell, when I've just spoke about this, that incorporation's probably not for you. There's a lot of disadvantages to do that, especially if you don't have a mortgage and you've only got one property. There's probably no point. And if you've not got any huge income either, then you've got a personal allowance to cover about £12,500. So therefore, that'll probably be the rent coming in. So therefore, you'll not be paying any tax anyway.
Yeah.
So these are all the things you've got to think about in terms of where you are. If you only got one property, you'll probably find it less advantageous. But it could be a viable option for those planning to expand their buy-to-let portfolios. Investing in property maintenance is a crucial consideration, isn't it, Richard, for accidental landlords?
Yeah, and we touched on it just a wee bit earlier there, and
why. Tell me why it's essential, an essential, crucial consideration.
Yeah, and as we did touch on it slightly just previously, but I knew we were coming to it anyway. So a well-maintained property is more likely to retain or increase its value over time. Retrofitting properties to improve like energy performance certificate, and that could also benefit the tenants and future buyers. So think about it, you're always thinking ahead as well, and helping reduce utility bills and enhance the overall comfort for tenants living there and ultimately buyers if you are going to sell it. Accidental landlords must diligently handle this critical area appropriately, protecting tenants' deposits as well.
Oh, I forgot about that in the beginning. Yeah. It's like you've got to have a custodial scheme, haven't you?
Yes. The only thing I can say is that landlords, if you're not using an agent and things, please safeguard deposits adequately to avoid significant compensation claims, because you can be charged up to 3 times the amount of the rent if you're caught without the deposit in a scheme. And also, I mean, there's other implications depending on the circumstances, but the deposit amount needs to go into a deposit scheme. To protect against such risks, as landlords must ensure compliance with deposit protection schemes and provide tenants with essential documents, including like the energy performance certificate, like I said. We covered that earlier, Jim, about Legionnaires certificates. You need proper tenant move-in packs. You need gas safety checks. There's a lot there.
How soon? What is the latest time you can lodge a deposit with a tenancy deposit scheme? How long have you got from getting that deposit and putting that tenant in?
Initially, I think you've only got 30 days to do that.
So you have to do this within 30 days.
Yeah.
So a tenant moves into the property, it gives you a deposit. You've got to get that lodged with that scheme. And if you don't get that lodged with that scheme, then you could be potentially liable for up to 3 times that rent.
Yep, definitely.
And for some landlords, for some self-managed landlords, because there's a lot of them out there, I tell you what, a lot of them are leaving themselves wide open. And then they say to themselves, oh, I could self-manage and I'll save myself the management fees from a property management company. It's like, wait a minute, you've just left yourself wide open to 3 months of your rent. So therefore, if you're at £1,500, you're leaving yourself wide open to £4,500 exposure. Now compare that against having a managing agent, a lot less to tell you the right answer.
You'd be surprised the amount of landlords that self-manage or have been doing things on their own for a while and come to me and say, look, I need somebody to look after this. And I'm like, okay, you got deposits on all these? Yeah, they're in my bank.
And genuinely, I think personally, I could start a claims company. There's an idea. A claims company for someone to say that, check with your landlord, and if it's no, I'll claim on your behalf and I'll get a cut out.
The thing is, in a lot of these landlords, they're just not educated to the fact that that's where it should be, and they're not intentionally trying to do something untoward or illegal, or they've got the deposits, they've maybe got them sitting.
I know.
They just don't know.
We do know that it's the old adage of a landlord. A lot of private landlords out there don't know what they don't know, and this is why we do things like this, so they understand what they should be doing. Because as I said before, a lot of them are actually self-managed. And I guarantee you, a lot of them are actually not compliant at all, in some shape or form. There's something that's been missed. I'll be honest. It's old adage that people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, and now and again you can get caught out, but once in a blue moon, because you've maybe missed something. However, when you go into things like the council properties, and it's like, wait a minute, they're not even complying with anything.
No.
It's often, well, how have you only got a smoke detector in the hall and the upper hall and the lower hall? Where's your smoke detector in the reception rooms and your heat detector in the kitchen? And your where's your carbon monoxide detector? And by the way, where's your gas certificate? It's like, what are you talking about? That's the response you get.
When I think of all the things that we need to go through in order to have a rental property compliant for the market and for a tenant to move in, and then, I mean, when you look at the council properties, they don't comply to the same standard. And smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors are one, Jim, as well. Legionella risk assessments and things. I mean, that's the council's enforced that has to be in place.
This is why I sometimes think when you see the other letting agents, and let's talk about that, about what they're trying to charge people to move in, and they're saying, oh, well, we're not really going to charge anything at the beginning for the next 3 months, and we're not going to charge anything to put a tenant in. I'm like, what corners are you cutting?
Yeah.
Because there's no way you could afford to do that and have the staff and resources in order to service that. So you're cutting corners somewhere.
They have to be, because I know how much time, resource, and things it takes to.
Funny, I said that about purple bricks, and look where they are now.
I know.
Sold for £1.
I know, but definitely, I think that there is a lot of time and resource and things that goes into doing things properly as a letting agent. And I think if letting agents are doing things cheap as chips, and I mean, there's something lacking there. Then.
So misunderstandings can invariably arise to rent and direct to family and friends, and leading to legal disputes as well. This is a really controversial one, because I remember as well. I often used to get it. It's like I'm going to rent it to my son, and I went, okay. So just be prepared to have no rent then, if that's the case, because your son's not going to pay the rent, and you're not going to enforce it, because that's just what you do. It's your son. How are you going to? Oh, I'm going to take my son to court. No, you're not. They're just not going to pay it, and you're just going to have to suck it up. That's it. Oh, I'm going to rent it to my best friend. Well, is it your best friend, like your real best friend? You don't want to lose your friendship with him. Yes, well, you need to keep it arm's length. You need to use a managing agent or
something. That's what I was just going to say,
It needs to be done from the outset. So
let's
talk about that. Talk about that a bit more, Richard. Tell us all about this then.
Yeah, if you say you were self-managing, and even though you do know the tenant, like you say, Jim, it could be your son, your best friend, it's still wise to employ the services of a letting agent, because they could establish the clear terms of everything in writing from the outset. You've got a proper tenancy agreement. You avoid potential conflicts between you and the tenant because you've got this person in the middle mediating. And it protects your rights as a landlord and them as a tenant as well. It keeps everybody right. My overriding message to every Fife accidental landlord, because that's what we're obviously talking about today, is that they must be aware of tax implications, considering incorporation of potential strategy, invest in property maintenance. That's a really good one as well. Obviously, you need to be providing something that's up to standard. Protect your tenants' deposits, like we spoke about, and establish clear terms to avoid disputes, and get your letting agent to do that. I mean, there is around about 170 pieces of regulations regarding your rental property. Yeah,
I think I've read them all. I'll tell you, even the Housing Benefit General Regulations Act and the Housing Act 88. Which is the ground for the whole legislation. It all came in place in the first place because the Rachman mentality, that's how it all came in, is literally the book is that thick. And that's my head, by the way, and the book's about that thick. And that's, no, I'm thick, by the way. It's like, I'm not saying I'm thick. I'm just saying that's the thickness of the book. It's like, but literally, that is a huge minefield of legislation, which can actually be interpreted. Because I used to interpret it the right way, or I used to argue, with the government and with the local authority about how the legislation is interpreted, and I used to successfully win most of the time. Well, all the time actually. Maybe they should have read the same book. But that's effectively what it is. You've got over 170 pieces of legislation. It's like what you said, Richard, and it's a minefield of it. It's great if it all goes right.
Yeah,
and this is where landlords fail to understand, because when landlords do go into management, sometimes once in a blue moon, you'll get somebody who goes, well, nothing's happening every month, and it's just going very, very well, and what's coming next. It's like, well, I'll just take my property back now, and because there's nothing really needing, so I'll be able to save myself the management fees, and what happens next, Richard?
They come back to you in a couple of months' time and be like, it's all went wrong, and the tenant won't answer me, and they've not paid their rent, and I can't get access for this, and multitude of things.
Because they've got no established relationship with the tenant.
Yeah.
And the tenant came to us because they wanted to deal with a managing agency. Some tenants do not want to, newsflash, some tenants do not want to deal with private landlords direct. They want to deal with a letting agency.
I've got so many tenants.
They understand that the letting agency is a professional organisation looking after them and looking after the property to make sure everything's okay. Whereas the landlord, it's a direct conflict in the fact that the landlord is like, well, wait a minute, it's kind of that relationship, sort of we're in between in order to mediate, I suppose.
Mediation is so important. It's one of the most important things. Yeah. And I've got so many tenants that come to the long-standing tenants, and if for whatever reason maybe the property does eventually need to be sold or they need to move, they come to us and say, well, can I find something with you? I want to stay with you guys, because we've got that established relationship with us, and they trust us and we trust them.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that's the thing. So if you're, in conclusion, with the housing market that experienced a slowdown, I personally suspect that the number of homeowners are considering becoming accidental landlords by opting to rent out their properties instead of selling will possibly start to go up and go
I
up.
think we'll see a bit of an increase in that. I already have seen that coming into play over the last few months, and I expect we will see a bit more of that.
So do you think they should weigh the risks of renting out their home and the potential rewards? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I know many stories of Fife homeowners and things who have waited maybe 5 or 6 years after the credit crunch hit and to find their target price, and for their existing home, they want to get the right price, and only to realise it cost them tens of thousands of pounds, and the cost of that was the price that they had to pay for their new home. So on the other side of the coin, I know plenty of accidental landlords who in Fife have used the fact that they have become the accidental landlord as an opportunity to build an impressive rental portfolio over the last 10, 15 years since the credit crunch. Do you know, they become a landlord by accident and then ended up, do you know what I mean? They continued and built quite a good portfolio over the years. So, I mean, that does happen.
So if you're uncertain or do not possess all the facts, I would say, don't hesitate to contact Richard. You're the lettings director at the end of the day, Richard. You've got a wealth of experience in this. And then he can give you an appropriate level-headed advice and make the right and help you make the right decision by taking proactive steps. Remember, if you decide after the conversation with Richard that you're going to self-manage, fill your boots. That's exactly where it is right now. If that's what you want to do, if you want to self-manage. I will throw a statistic out there for self-managed landlords, though, versus managing agents.
Mm-hmm.
You're 262% more likely to be in rent arrears. I think it's of 3 months or more. Yeah. 262% more likely to be in rent arrears.
I think, is it not 268%?
Well, splitting hairs.
I know. I think
I've split that many hairs. I've not got any left. It's like I've obviously split a lot of hairs over the years. So level-headed advice, I think, is getting the facts rather than just people's opinions on what you should really want to do as you navigate the property market successfully, even during uncertain times in the housing market. What's your final words on this, Richard? And
I definitely agree with that, Jim. I think everybody's circumstances are individual. If you were speaking to me and I was advising you, I would obviously look at your circumstances and advise you what is best for you. And if that is self-management, then albeit, or if I would advise you that maybe letting wasn't the right choice. I mean, if you're only looking to let your property for maybe 4 or 5 months,
I've said to people,
then residential letting's not really the way forward. Do you know what I mean? So I mean, and I would happily advise people that way. I think just to skip back, if you're going to go down that route, I think it really is important to have a good agent on side. If you get to that point where you think, well, everything's going smoothly, and don't make the mistake of then taking it back and trying to do it when you're not educated to the fact of how to deal with things. I think to get rid of your letting agent or to remove your letting agent, I think is the last resort when you're reviewing the costs and things involved and your outlays. And if do you know what I mean, if you've got a property and your mortgage rates have skyrocketed and things, and you're struggling to meet then obviously your cost for letting agents is something that you can remove, but be careful before you do that.
A wee bit of advice, and what I do as an estate agent, I go out to see a few people, and actually they want to rent or sell. They want 2 options.
Yeah.
But usually, typically, they end up selling because I obviously tell them what we've just discussed here. But there is a wee bit, it could be beneficial for an estate underletting agent that comes out to see you to actually say, I tell you what, we'll manage it for you. Mm-hmm. Because we'll get the income every year and we'll get the house sale again anyway later on. Yeah. And for me, that's a big no-no. That's a red flag. If somebody's like that, that's not the right person you've got in front of you. So often, most of the time, actually, at the end of my conversation, is most people will actually end up selling it. Mm-hmm. And it's not the fact that I want them to sell it. I just want them to make the decision based on the right circumstances and based on the facts on their circumstances individually. I think that's the most important thing. It's not my income that's important, it's their income that's important, and their future success and their future wealth that's important as well. After all, it's outside of your normal home. It's probably one of the biggest assets you've got in terms of investment.
Yeah, definitely. Good.
Okay, so do you want to wind up here, Richard, and finish off?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that was a lot of good subjects we covered there. I know we did kind of veer off a wee bit there into wealth creation type things, but it was all good advice.
But that's the benefit. Let me just explain. You will see this. This is all, you know, we've got scripts and everything to follow, and we do that all the time, but we deviate completely from the script. You could read the script in 3 minutes. But the reality is, you know, by the time we've been through it, by the different strings and, you know, the different branches that appear on this, and the different opportunities that become available, and the different other ways that you can generate wealth through property, and the tax implications, and we go a bit more and drive down deep in depth to this, to give you more content and give you more facts about, so in order to help you make a better decision. But my final words, just before you finish off, Richard, is get the right advice from the right professionals.
Yeah, always.
So speak to a financial advisor, speak to a mortgage broker, speak to a really good letting agent. Hint, hint, Richard. That's you. And then also have a really good solicitor on board as well. That's probably the key people that you need to have.
Yeah, as you say, Jim, you could contact me anytime, and I would happily do a referral through to any of these types of specialists, whether it's an accountant, mortgage advisor, and things if people need it. Definitely. So. Okay,
there's a few questions there, Richard. We're not going to take them live now. You probably will take them individually anyway for that person, and so because we don't want to discuss individual circumstances for people.
You
can go to that person direct and deal with them individually about that. I'm just going to leave you. We could finish here, Richard. I'm just going to.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. I know you've been busy today and traveling and things, so thanks for joining. Okay.
Okay. Bye bye for now, folks.
Okay. Bye.